From my experience, 9 out of 10 designers struggle with choosing colours because they don't have a clear process. So in this video, we're going to solve that with demos, examples and a step-by-step guide that will help you increase your confidence in selecting colours and building palettes. We'll start with the questions that you must answer before you begin, then I'll show you how to pick the right colours for the job, and finally some questions to help you verify that you've made appropriate choices. So instead of wasting time throwing around options in the software or endlessly scrolling online for inspiration or simply copying other designs, here are the questions I ask myself in order to proceed logically. Firstly, the first act is before you start. You need to answer these questions. Don't skip this to build a solid brief. Number one, what constraints do I have? There might be brand guidelines. There might be limitations of a format, for example, in print. Then nextly, what guidance do I have? Is there a written brief already? What existing materials and resources do you have to work with? Do they give you any guidance in terms of your colour choices? Number three, what do I want the viewer to do? So thinking about the action, thinking about the purpose of this design. And number four, what do I want the viewer to feel? What kind of emotions am I trying to evoke? What moment is the viewer in when they're engaging with this design? So answering those four questions helps you to build a brief and have some parameters by which to choose your colours. So let's jump into the software and I'll demonstrate how we do this. Number one, when you're selecting colours, is to choose a primary hue. Now, what is a hue? I like to think of this as the answer a 2-year-old child would give you if you asked them, what colour is this? They wouldn't say sapphire or sienna or mustard. They would stick to basic colours like green, red, blue, yellow, primary colours, secondary colours. And that's what a hue is. It's the general sort of group whereabouts you are on the sort of colour spectrum, and you want to choose this based on psychology, based on associations, based on mood. So colour psychology is some prior knowledge you'll need as a designer. We have a free ebook on this which gives you a basic introduction to the subject and lets you know some of the representations, like red is about passion, danger, love, fire, green, growth, prosperity, health, eco-conscious, sustainability, blue, trust, reliability, power, relaxation, peace. So this will give you kind of an introduction to these ideas, but you want to think as well about associations in different places and different cultures, like political parties, where you are. It could be religions, it could be sports teams. They have a particular association and people feel very strongly about them, so you might be careful what colours you're using in South Central Los Angeles or Belfast, Northern Ireland, or wherever you are. There'll be colours to use and colours to avoid depending on the scenario. So being aware of that when it comes to the design and where this design is going to go is an important thing. But I'm conscious that you can't rely on any one element in design, just type, just colour, just your layout, just your imagery to produce the desired effect. It's all things working together. Just using yellow doesn't make something optimistic, red dangerous, purple doesn't necessarily make it regal. Like this example I've got here in Illustrator. The royal family, to come across as regal, as royal, they may use purple, but everything has to work together, all the elements, else it's not going to produce the desired effect. So colour is one piece of this. So you should have made good progress at this point with this idea of choosing a primary hue before you've even touched any software. You're thinking about the psychology, avoiding any negative associations or joining with positive ones, the mood that you want to bring. Is it going to be a cool color like blue? Is it going to be a warmer color like yellow, orange, red? And that should help you think about primarily where you want to go with this. And then you want to choose that hue and then move into selecting a particular color logically. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you. So here in Illustrator, I've got set up these two clothing brands, and these are both eco-conscious, sustainable clothing brands that produce their clothing in an environmentally sustainable way, and that is a key part of their offer and their proposition. So when it comes to selecting a primary hue and then choosing a particular color logically, I like to use the HSB sliders, which you can see here, and this stands for hue, saturation and brightness. So you can see how these work. You turn on the saturation, it gets paler. What we're doing there is adding white, which is making a tint. We turn down the brightness, we're adding black, which is making a shade. And so I like to select a primary hue. So do we want red or orange or yellow or green or blue or purple or pink for this brand? Well, we talked about them being a green. We use that as a description in English. If something's green, it's environmentally friendly, sustainable. So we're going to go for somewhere around like a mid sort of green type color for this brand. So then you would apply this and kind of see what it looks like. So this is our primary color. I'll make it the type for HIP and the background for this clothing collective. HIP is a youthful, young, edgy brand for teenagers and people in their early 20s. Clothing Collective is a more mature brand for people who are maybe in their 40s. So here we can see straight away that we have got this very saturated and bright green. And for this HIP brand, it kind of works already. It's got this like very youthful feel to it. So I'm happy with that. Clothing Collective, not so much. It doesn't jive with this word mark and what we've talked about in terms of the target audience. So we would probably want to dial down the saturation so it wasn't so heavy, probably quite a lot. And then also with this being a background, this is kind of like a mint color now. I don't really want that. I want a calmer sort of feel. So I'm going to take the brightness down a little bit too. Then it's getting a little bit dark now because I've added black. So I'm going to have to take the saturation down even further for it to function effectively as a nice sort of background color. Maybe the brightness can come up a little bit. So this is more the kind of feel that I'm going for. So for the foreground, which is still black, I'm going to select this background. So I'm starting from the same place and then just bring the brightness down, and I've got something which contrasts. You might get to the point where it gets a bit too black and you want to bring that saturation up a little bit, so there's a little bit of green in there. But I think this is just kind of off green thing, so that kind of works for me. I'd maybe go even less saturated perhaps, but we're getting to that kind of idea, and this to me works. This gives the right kind of feel that we're looking for. It's more subtle with the green thing, but they both have that green aspect. But that's proceeding logically, selecting particular colours, because we're thinking about the contrast here between foreground and background. We're thinking about what the effect of the saturation and the brightness produces a mood. So we're not just saying green, therefore we've done the job because it's eco-conscious, because this obviously, next to this type, it looks ugly. But with this kind of typesetting on HIP, it works. So it's all about the context, and that's how I sort of proceed through using these HSB sliders to find the colours that I want. The third of 4 steps is to then build a palette. So you want to think now about how many colours that you are going to need. So how many colours should you use in a design? Well, you want to think about having options for background and foreground colours. If your type is going to be it may be a certain colour. I mean, I tend to recommend using black for type or white on a dark background. I wouldn't diverge much from that. Too much coloured up type, that's very saturated, becomes difficult to read. So just be conscious of that. But, you know, we'd maybe need something else, like if I don't know, if we've got a button or something like that, we might want a colour for that. So let's pretend this is a button. We'll just make it look sort of buttonish with this pill shape. So this could work. We could also maybe want another option for a different kind of button or to stand out a little bit more. So we might be again pushing our saturation back up, maybe a little bit of brightness just so it comes through, and maybe just finding something that's going to, you know, really draw the eye and bring us towards it. So thinking about where you're at and the kind of design that you're doing, you can establish sort of maybe some more colors, some more options for a palette, and I'll show you another option in a moment with some more on how we sort of build that palette out. But I recommend that you use the fewest amount of colors necessary. So if you can only use a few colors, that is better, because there's less chance of mistakes, and the more elements you bring into any kind of design, the more likelihood there's going to be mistakes or things aren't going to work well together. So it requires some skill to sort of build out and use more and more different elements of different kinds. So first of all, you can start out with like one color plus black and white. So this is a very effective technique. You see it a lot with things like books. So like this kind of color scheme, I should say, like just like a red with black and white on this cover. Got another one here. And this is kind of a common thing that you see it with things like signage, but it also works. And there's certain combinations like red and black and white, or yellow with black and white, which really works, and there's a lot you can do with it immediately. I've got some examples here on the web as well. This packaging here for Brooklyn Brewery for their Pilsner Lager, this is kind of a mustardy yellow this time, but again with black and white, and that is a very sharp way of doing it. Borussia Dortmund, the German football team, famous for their black and yellow strip, and you see here on their website they've brought that through all the way through. So it's very black and white, with using yellow as an accent for headlines or on some of the buttons and captions, and that works really well. Inter Milan, another football team, they've recently rebranded and they've gone for this very bright digital blue, which was brighter than their previous blue, and they're famous for their black and blue stripes. And again, this black and blue and white really works well together, because the white can work over the black or the white or the blue. So they make a big use of that in their interface. Obviously it's a lot in the photography of people in shirts, but also here the next match is highlighted in blue. The following ones are on the black background. A lot of the principles here also we talked about in the principles of layout series here on the channel. If you haven't seen that, you can see the use of grids here on this website. You can see the use of scale with these large headlines combined with this smaller type, and there's some really clever layout. I really like this website, but that's a really simple color scheme. Just one color plus black and white is a really effective thing that you can do. So what about if you want to now break out from that? Well, let's look at some other types of color schemes. So this is Adobe Color, and there are other similar and free tools that you can find online. And this one's quite helpful because it tells us on the left these different color harmony rules in this column. So here we've got monochromatic. Mono means one color, and monochromatic schemes are where we have a single hue. So if we change this color mode from RGB to HSB, we can see all the way across the hue is 245. That might be quite small on your screen. Hope you're not watching this on a phone, you won't be able to see anything. But it's 245 all the way across, but it's the saturation and brightness have changed. So one color, we're using a single hue all the way across, but the variations of that. And that's a very simple thing to do. That's what we were just doing with our example, with our clothing example, where we used those other greens. They were all one hue, and it was a monochromatic scheme to give us some different tints and shades to allow us to have different options within a user interface. So that's a monochromatic scheme, and it's important to learn the language of design. This really helps you as a designer, not only in working with other people like your art director, but also with your own thinking. Once you know the language, it helps you to recognize things, and that deepens your learning. So let's just look at some of these. Some of these I find a bit bizarre, like square. I'm not sure like to get into this and apply this, but something like analogous color schemes, which is colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So like going from purple to blue, or yellow to green, red to orange, etc. This tends to give quite a sort of calming feel. It feels like these colors should belong together, and it's just like a broadening this kind of monochromatic type feel. So it's often easy to do something with this kind of analogous scheme. So I quite like this, and you can bring these in a bit closer. Adobe Color allows you to do this, and you can port these over straight into your Adobe software. You can just copy these hex references into Figma or whatever software you're using, and you can go, sort of wider. It's not really an analogous scheme anymore, very close, just off from monochromatic, and sort of broaden that. So you can play around with that, but that's a nice option. I like using analogous schemes, easy to make the colors work together. Another really useful one is complementary, which is where you have colors that are on the exact opposite side of the color wheel. And a lot of popular combinations, Christmassy sort of reds and greens, popular combinations like blues and oranges, or sort of darker blues and yellows. You see these a lot. This kind of looks like IKEA. So you get these sort of feel, and these complementary schemes where you have colours on the opposite side of the wheel, they give more of a vibrant kind of feel to designs. I also like these split complementary schemes where you go opposite, and you don't go to the exact opposite but either side of that to bring a couple of colours there. Again, you can bring this in a little bit, and that often gives you some really interesting options when you do this. That's kind of ugly, but there in certain places you get some different interesting kind of options there with the split complementary. I quite like using that as well. So play around with this kind of thing, and this will give you some starting points for building palettes. So let's demonstrate how we might do that. So I've got a couple of brands here. One is Coding Junior, which is hands-on coding camps for 8 to 11-year-olds, and then Artificigens. It's a terrible name, isn't it? I just made these up, which harnesses the power of artificial intelligence for your business. And these businesses are both in tech, so they have some similar features, but obviously they have a different target market. One is aimed at children and parents. The other one is aimed at business leaders who would have the opportunity to make purchasing decisions about the partners and the tools that they use. So because they share similar features, you can pick up you might choose some similar things. So if we went through our process, so first of all, we're going to choose a primary hue. So I'm just going to turn the brightness up. So this is off black and saturation, so we can actually see the color. Throw it around the middle somewhere. So I'm going to say blue, because I'm going to think that trust is going to be a key element with both of these things, because you want parents to trust that if children are going to a camp, that it's going to be a safe environment and it's going to be good quality education. And similarly with businesses purchasing and sharing their information with AI computers, they want to be able to trust that. So this is going to be a key element. So we might want some kind of blue. And then, so going on from that would be next to, let me just saturate this a little bit more. So maybe say here, like, it's nice to go maybe more towards this cyan. I don't, it just gives a little bit more of a, just a nice difference to it, a friendliness to it, rather than it being too much of like a royal blue. So I will go for something like this, and then I would think about this kind of scheme that I want to use. So let's look at this Coding Junior first of all, and maybe, bring a couple of, do you know what I'm going to do? Is just snap these things to make it a little bit easier. So we talked about these color schemes, so I'm just going to copy maybe like a reference here, hex reference, see if I can bring this into Adobe Color. Where's our primary one? Here. Okay, so this is our primary one here, and I like this split complementary thing because it gives vibrancy like complementary does, but I'm not sure about these kind of dark orange, dark mustard kind of colors. It doesn't have the vibrancy that I want, so I'm maybe going to split complementary so I can get more of a yellow in there, and it gives me some more options as well because I've got this orange as well in there. in the mix. So let's kind of see what we've got. So I've maybe just dial this, and this is where your eye and your taste as a designer comes into this. There's always going to be that element to it, however many lessons that we teach. I think somewhere around here is pretty cool. So we've created quite an interesting scheme here. It's also given us these shades for this yellow and this orange. So I'll maybe just copy in the hex references. It's probably as easy as anything for this quick demo. So I've got this yellowish one, and then I've got this orange type one. And what you want to do is finesse this. So obviously we're doing this for the purposes of a demo, and we're doing this quickly, but I kind of like this. It has that sense of like warmth, optimism, but also, you know, with the vibrancy, you know, across these colors. So I think there's definitely something in this, but you'll start to finesse this once you bring this into your actual usage of where you're going to, you know, create this on a website or whatever your scenario is. I think maybe as a background color, you know, I quite like this. So I definitely think there's something to this general vibe. Maybe black. So I'm maybe thinking, is this going to be bright enough across this? So it's having some options. We probably wouldn't use this as a headline. Maybe the orange, we'd keep that in a darker color. So we'd maybe like this, but we'd maybe want to create some shades and some tints from this. So maybe actually we turn up the brightness, we turn down the saturation a little bit, and get kind of a color that'll work better for, you know, a button. Let me just try this. It's going to contrast a little bit more from a black. And so it's playing around with this kind of thing. You know, maybe we want an off black kind of color. That is going to work. That's going to give us some nice options for titling that don't look too black. That's maybe even still too bright. So it's playing around, and it's using it in context. So if you've got some illustrations, you've got wider parts of your interface, it's just playing with that and having fun with that to make that work. Now, we talked about this other brand having some similar characteristics. So what I want to do here is I'd maybe start from the same place and say, okay, these colors again for this brand, but we need to make sure when we're building a palette we have the right feel and we match these things together. So what wouldn't work is when you have things, these are all pretty high on the saturation and brightness, is when you have things that just don't match up in the sort of tone. They look odd and they start to look strange. Like if we just bring these down, because this is where I think this needs to go. It needs to probably be a little bit less saturated, and this is probably more slipped there, the feel that we want. And it is a case of going back and forth on these things, and you need colors with a similar tone. So tone is like tint and shade together. It's like adding gray. So the blacks and whites just kind of looking like they're in the same place. So you can see here now I've messed with this. If we do like an RGB red and green, they don't match with this blue and this kind of goldy beige color here. They just do not fit together. So we need these things to all match up. Now we could make a green work in this scenario, but we'd want to look at, what's this, like 57. Let's start with that and sort of match these up, and straight away that feels like it's coming in and it's going to match a little bit better. And maybe desaturate it a little bit so it's not competing as much with this blue, and it's playing around with these things. And when you've got people watching you on video, it always seems to be more difficult and slower, but this should give you the sort of idea. I'd probably go back to these original colors, maybe the orange, and again bring it more where it's in that similar sort of space, and finding something where the tones match. And this will give you more of the feel that you're wanting and that you're going for. So I think like if this was a larger kind of blue field, then you can imagine more what this thing's going to look like. if this was like an accent, you can see this sort of color. Turn this snapping off. Is gonna work as a scheme because you've got a match of similar tones and shades. So we're going a bit less saturated than we are here. So matching those up is really important. If we had, I don't know, maybe this would be part of the design, like all these circles. If we suddenly make these different sizes, if we like make these red, green, it suddenly just looks like really ridiculous. But if these can match up in a similar way, we can get something that sort of feels right. It feels like it's in the right sort of ballpark. I didn't have that selected, and like it belongs together. This is maybe like a a blue that would go next to it. And so it's just taking the time. That one needs finessing, but the idea of taking the time to match things up and having similar shades work together is how you build these sort of color palettes that are going to hang together and make sense. Let's have a look at this in use. Like on the Headspace website, we have a double split complementary color scheme where we've got yellows and oranges across from blues and purples. You could create something like this. Here we go, double split complementary, and we've got like yellow and orange. I need to drag this around. Blues and purples. It's not quite dialing it in here, but you can see sort of like purple across from yellow, blue and orange. And just a point that you do want to finesse these things, and they've finessed that quite nicely and have various shades of purple and blue and shades of yellow and orange. But what you don't see here are really reds and pinks or greens and browns. We do have a little bit of green in these little illustrations within the app interface, but it's relying more on these key colors, with orange being their key brand color, and they've clearly jumped off from that. You can get into some more crazier schemes. So here we've got this pills where they've got this sort of green on green with purple, and then the peach. And I think the issue here is that it might work in some cases sort of on the bottle, but in the user interface, these colors, there's too much going on. There's too many colors, and it really is just too much noise, and it's not producing sort of a pleasing effect overall. I don't really like this olive green on this color here. I don't even know what to call this. It's sort of a peachy orange. And similarly with this Bioma, I really like the packaging, even though it's a bit pixelated, this image, a bit low res. There's something fun about the packaging. It makes it different. It makes it stand out. It becomes, there's a lot of white within skincare, and it gives you something a little bit different and makes it stand out. But why do we need an interface which is pink and yellow and blue and all this kind of stuff going on? It really crowds it out, and it's just too much. So you don't necessarily, just because you have brand colors doesn't mean when it comes to your job of selecting colors mean you need to select those for the website, because it can really be over the top and not allowing the packaging to sing and come through. Again, these things work because the sort of the tones are right, even though some of them, like this hot pink, is kind of a lot more saturated maybe than this mint kind of color, but the sort of the base colors sort of work together and have this sort of scheme, and there's certain colors that are avoided or not used, and that's enough. Like, I would encourage them to look at something like Fender guitars. So if we just scroll down a little bit, we can see that the finishes of the guitars are very colorful, but the interface is pretty much just white, black, and then red being the only accent color, other than this kind of grayscale, black, white and gray. So whether it's something like a headline has a big red background, just the little titles that let us know where we are, or it being the point where you can click special offers, or these bits to start a free trial, or the company's logo, or the button, those key elements being in red just help guide us. It simplifies the interface. even though the colors of the guitars are very vibrant, we have this quiet interface around it, and that allows us to see where we're going. With Cowboy, the electric bikes company, they've similarly simplified this with these colors in the background. Just pick up on the colors in their bikes, or they've picked colors to evoke the right sort of mood. And I feel a lot more calmer on this website, whereas on this site for the skin products, I'm like, I don't feel very calm doing my shopping. It's a bit jarring. Whereas I'm enjoying my experience here on this Cowboy site. It's very Apple-like, the interface, but this use of colors is smart. Just picking up on the color of the bike, making it a little bit darker for this gradient that looks like photo paper in the background. It's just a really smart, neat way of doing it. And again, these tones match from browns to earthy kind of olive greens, and they've just varied the brightness and saturation to get the right sort of tones for the usage, whether they need to be in a background, and make it sort of work together. So I really like that. Something like this site for Sweet Green, I want to show you lots of examples. People always ask for more examples. This again is just an example of how you can bring tones. Now this is a bit more modern, where there's some bright sort of yellows that do pop out and do look like they maybe don't belong in the palette, and there's a little bit of that youthful anti-design feel that comes through. But overall, similar to what we were doing before, you've got dark green text on a lighter green background, and these colors, the brown and the green, both have that similar tone to help them work together. And this yellowish color, which is still green, so it's within that sort of it's an analogous color palette from sort of yellow across to green and the brown. It pops out, and it's used just minimally. It's a small percentage of each composition, so it works to be a highlight and something that sort of sticks out. So this is a subtle use of color that brings interest to this interface instead of it just being black and white, but it doesn't overwhelm it. This lower saturation look produces more of a calm feel in this scenario. So what they're doing here effectively, and something you'll want to do, is establish some rules for usage. So think about those UI considerations that we talked about, where you're going to use buttons, things being of the right contrast, type being legible, practical things, and simple rules like what's going to be your dominant color, your secondary, your accent colors. Really allow it to work. So we've talked in other videos on this channel about the 60-30-10 rule. So 60% of the design being in one color, 30% being in your next secondary color, and 10% for the accents. And a lot of the sites we've looked at today, just thinking back to like Inter Milan, in each of these panels, like here, we've got blue in the background and then the white on top of it. And they've kind of observed this in each panel. Like here, it's mainly black, and then we've got parts of the blue and white with, let me think, what did we look at that was good? I guess similarly with Cowboy, where you've got mainly the background colors are dominant and then white. You definitely see this with Sweet Green, where obviously we've got a photograph here which is dominant, and then your accent is just this yellow, that's your 10%. And similarly here, yeah, we've got this green, the light green in the background is the 60%, the dark green of the type being the 30%, and the yellowish of the accent and the button being that 10% of the color usage. Obviously you've got the image here as well, which, with a similar principle, that's kind of 60% of the space. So it's like a dominant image, and this type is in a smaller area. So this is, a good example of establishing this. So you want to, if you're selecting colors, particularly for a brand, give some idea about usage, because if blue, for example, is your primary brand color, but you've also got a yellow and an orange in there, you don't want people making everything yellow. Yellow t-shirts, yellow packaging, yellow flyers, yellow, website, because you want blue to come through primarily. So establishing, no, this is the color we're going to use primarily and how we're going to use it, but don't use it to color up type, and you can use it for a background, or you should use it for buttons. Some sort of use, that's important when it comes to selecting colors. So that might just be for yourself as you're building a website, but that might be also something that you pass on through brand guidelines. The third act is reviewing your work, and this will help give you confidence that you've made the best selection. So first of all, ask yourself, is it functional? So does it work? Do the colors that you've chosen support the information? Do they lead to the desired action? Is everything legible? Is color used consistently throughout the design? Does it guide the viewer? These questions about function. With something like packaging, we think of the ingredients, the colors of the ingredients being used for the packaging, and that's a simple way to guide the viewer to their choice. Maybe used a little bit more subtly on this recent repackaged design for Burt's Crisp, where their brand color of this dark blue is still able to come through on all of their packaging, and their word mark with a big contrast in white type. But this bold all caps type for each of the flavors is colored up, just giving a little cue to the viewer that roast beef is brown, prawn cocktail's pink, chili is red, mature cheddar cheese is yellow, etc. Just helping them make that decision that little bit quicker when browsing for potato chips. Similarly, something like United Sodas, who've made a splash with this very minimalist typographic can design, where each can is just identified by its color. So blueberries are obviously blue, and pear elderflower is green, and we've got cherry red, and we've got blackberry and white grape, etc., strawberry in pink and mango colored. And this has given them a whole brand just based on colors being used in this identifying in this very minimal scheme. Interesting here with their user interface, everything down to their packaging to the actual interface of their website is in black and white. We talked about earlier how these packaging interfaces were maybe crowding out the packaging. Here the packaging is the hero, and this black and white canvas really allows that colour to stand out. So I think that's been done quite smartly. Even something like Notion, known for their very black and white look, and just the emojis that kind of stand out in the interface, but their whole brand with these hand-drawn style black and white illustrations. But even here, what colour are the buttons? Red. They draw your eye. Try Notion free. They want people, you're not logged in, you're not signed up, they want you to join, so they're promoting that action. Even throughout, because they've got such a simple interface, the little pops of colour within the simple website colors, so the interface bits of color stand out. And then things like these logos for brands and companies that actually use their product, you see it a little bit quicker because you maybe recognize the Figma logo, so you just spot that even if you're quickly scrolling past, and it allows it to do that because of simplicity. But red here, the color is supporting the action. And nextly, you want to ask, is it appealing? So color is one of the primary tools that we have as designers to make things look appealing. So something like Stripe, which is, a payment processing, it's not the most exciting thing. Maybe it's quite functional, quite technical, and they've got this almost black and white kind of interface, but they've added this animated gradient at the top, and this color just adds some appeal, adds some interest into something that would look quite flat and uninspiring. It also again allows the color logos of the companies to be used and stand out, whereas if you've got a very colorful interface or lots of photography, it's sometimes useful to put those things as gray so they don't compete with everything else. But they have that option this time. Brooklyn Brewery, again, another one from Thirst Agency, and they, for this Pulp Art beer, which is a cool name, this hazy IPA, it's described as being juicy and tropical, and you get that kind of feel. This to me evokes summer, and when you see these boxes on the shelf, it's something, the colour gives it that appeal. You want to pick it up because not just bright colours, but the colours all work together in a nice way. There's some nice contrasting blue to yellow to give it some vibrancy, and it just, the whole thing works together in this design, including the colour, to give it that summery, appealing, fun kind of feel. And make sure you also go through the practical questions like, is it consistent with brand guidelines? If you have those, check them and check them again to make sure your work fulfills that. And have I answered the brief? And this is a great time to ask this question because it will be the basis of your presentation. Whether you're just showing this to your line manager, your boss, or whether it's going to be shown to a client in a presentation, going back to the brief and referring to the key points that were in there, that can be your reasoning, your rationale for why you've selected the colours that you have, and it helps you explain that to your boss or to your client. So hopefully this video lesson has been helpful for you. We've made a companion ebook about how to select colors, which you can download for free via a link in the description of this video. If you have any issues with downloading that, just email us via our website, link to that as well in the description, and a real human will get back to you and help you out and make sure you can access that. But let us know if the ebook and this lesson has been helpful for you. We hope it has, and until next time, happy designing.